We back, mic'd up team recap. Today we talking about the Who Cares Texans. It was real bad. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, Mike. But how you doing?
Well, I'm doing really bad actually. I was already kind of down because we were having to talk about Bill O'Brien and this kind of questionable team, and then that was rough. So speaking of what wasn't rough, I guess we'll transition right into the draft class, Mike. Not a huge haul of guys, but kind of what are your general thoughts on at least Blacklock and Grenard early?
Yeah, I actually liked it. I know a lot of the Texans fans are probably feeling like a Bill crying, but actually the first two picks were solid. They actually were solid. I think both of them were good value at the picks. I think kind of addressing that front seven. I think it for this team that they needed. I think they needed an extra kind of athlete on the edge, and I think with the third round pick, you're going to get a solid rotational linebacker. And I think you can't ask for much more from a third round pick at that point. And then Blacklock's going to be able to step right in and be in that rotation for D tackles, and it was a solid pick there, great value. But obviously, we're just talking about the draft class here, so I'll keep it positive. I like the first two picks.
No, I agree. I mean, obviously, with limited draft capital, I think that you kind of just have to do the best with what you have, and I do kind of think that they did that. I mean, we're going to talk about the rest of the defense later, but like last year, you had nobody with more than 7.5 sacks. So are Blacklock and Grenard going to be the guys who eclipse that number? Probably not right away. But I do think that they are guys who you can kind of plug and play almost, and that is going to kind of help elevate a Whitney Mercilus. Help Brendan Scarlett develop a little bit, help take some pressure off J.J. Watt. I think that there's kind of a lot of potential in both of these guys to be able to help out in the short term and then really develop into kind of really just solid overall players in the long term, and to get them at 40 and 90, I think that, there are a lot of people who thought that Blacklock should have been kind of a mid to late first round pick, and then Grenard kind of back in November, December when I was laying out like who I wanted to watch, he was considered like a top 6-7 edge guy, So even though he kind of fell during the process and Blacklock kind of slipped a little bit on draft day, I really don't think you can complain about it. I think both are pretty solid scheme fits. I have a little bit of a concern putting Blacklock in a 3-4, but I do think he'll be able to play that 4 tech pretty well. And Grenard, obviously, he's kind of a natural 3-4 outside linebacker, so really it just works for me. So speaking of what might not work, though, Mike, are you ready to hop into this offense?
Well, let's hop right in. Speaking of hopping right in, I'm not seeing the Hopkins. That's a sad thing to see. What a fail of a trade. Oh, my gosh. Like, obviously, David Johnson is a fine player, but
wait. Well, is David Johnson a fine player, or was he a fine player? I think that's a question that we have to bring up.
I think he is a fine player. But DeAndre Hopkins is next level. You can't even equate the value. It's not even close. DeAndre Hopkins is in our decade, in our time of football, he's one of the best. 2 years ago, he had a catch percentage of like 98, 99%. He didn't drop very many balls, and last year it wasn't much different. The man's a weapon. He does it all for that team. He's the reason Deshaun Watson likely is what he is. And to trade him away for David Johnson, that's a joke. It's a joke. It felt like a joke. It felt like a fake Adam Schefter account was tweeting that when you first heard it. But, man, it was really Adam Schefter tweeting that. It's a disgrace to say the least. Oh, Bill O'Brien.
I agree. I 100% agree. And then especially when you get a second-round pick in the trade and then you end up using that just to get Brandin Cooks. It is definitely a disgrace. But I will try and play devil's advocate a little bit. And maybe this is what Bill O'Brien is thinking. I'm not 100% sure. But I do think that maybe you can see, especially from like a play calling perspective, that there is maybe a downside to having such a demanding figure at wide receiver. Maybe having to game plan a guy who he is automatically going to get 15, 16, 17, even 20 targets. Maybe there is kind of a downside to that, and you would rather have a room of 5 guys who you can spread the ball to evenly. Okay, you downgrade Hopkins a little bit, but you elevate the rest of the room. You downgrade Hopkins a lot.
There we go.
You basically go from a wide receiver 1 to a wide receiver 2 at your wide receiver 1, which is problematic. But then you kind of elevate the rest of that room, and they're going to improve your run game to try and take some of the pressure off. I think that it's It's not the most insane strategy I've ever heard, but I just think the compensation for, if you're going to try and pull something like that, you have to get more compensation than a second-round pick and David Johnson. You
Yeah,
look at what Stephon Diggs brought in for the Minnesota Vikings. I think that we would both agree with no question that DeAndre Hopkins is leaps and bounds better than Stephon Diggs, and Stephon Diggs is likely a top 10 receiver in the league. So it's just tough, man. It's real tough.
yeah, but if you want to address the running back position, first of all, great running back class. Other than the last pick of the first round, they all went in the second round. So if that was really a position you wanted to address, you could have still got probably a player with all pro potential in that second round pick. So, or in the free agent market, Devonta Freeman's still available. Carlos Hyde, what was he? He was close to 1,000-yard season, if not 1,000-yard season last year. And obviously, he's not a game changer, but he went for $3.5 million. It's not like it's a cap hit. Why not sign both? You could sign both for a reasonable spot, and you have a really good running back duo at that point to go with your weapons. I just don't get it. And obviously, they want to be. I don't know if they want to go to run first team or what, but why change your attitude and your persona of your team when it was pretty clear what you guys were? I don't understand why you took your identity away to try to morph it into something that you weren't last year and you haven't been before.
So that's a really interesting point that you bring up identity, Mike, because I kind of wanted to ask you, what is the identity of this team? I think that that's really my main problem is they're almost kind of like schizophrenic in their moves. I don't think that you can rationalize, on one hand, you're trading for Laramie Tunsil, trading for Carlos Hyde, trading for Brandin Cooks, but then on the other hand, trading away Jadeveon Clowney, trading away DeAndre Hopkins, letting DJ Reader go in free agency. I just don't understand, like, the division there. It's like two separate teams are operating at one time. One that's trying to build up and become a contender and make those last moves to push them over the top. But at the same time, you're stripping the team of all the playmakers, and it's like you're having a fire sale, and you're getting these on the dollar for some of the most elite players in the league. I just don't understand the identity of this team, and I don't understand the vision behind it, because at the end of the day, like I said, I can maybe try and see it from where Bill O'Brien's coming from, but it's not like you filled a ton of holes here. You just flip that pick for Brandin Cooks, who, as we said, is a worse player. You have a ton of holes on the offensive line. I don't think Max Sharping or Zach Fulton should be starting. And I think that Tytus Howard, he kind of looked questionable last year. Obviously, he got injured towards the later half of the year. But it's like we don't really know what we're getting from him. So at the end of the day, you really have one elite offensive lineman in Tunsil, a decently solid one in Nick Martin. But what else do you have on this offense? A running back's not just going to be effective because, he was effective a couple of years ago. He's going to be effective because you make him effective, And I don't really know if this team is going to make him effective because who is drawing double teams deep for this team? There's no DeAndre Hopkins. There's no one to take guys out of the box and make David Johnson's job easier. So while I do kind of agree that he is still a fine player and I think that he will be better leaving Arizona, I don't know if this is where he is going to thrive,
No, I agree with you, and I'll, I guess, play a little bit of devil's advocate. This team still can compete. They still have the players. Deshaun Watson, he speaks for himself. He can be a one-man team. Not that he is a one-man team. He has weapons. He has some talent around him. But they still can compete. I guess my problem was they were competing last year. It seemed like they were just a couple pieces away from taking that next step. But if anything, they took a step down. And it's kind of sad to see because they were a fun team to watch. They were almost there. You felt like they were just a couple pieces away, just a couple like players away from being a real competitive and just being there almost on the Chiefs level. I think they might have been a more well-rounded team talent-wise than the Chiefs. And I think they would have just needed a couple more players to maybe just compete with them, the Ravens, and the top end of the AFC. And I think nothing they did this offseason shows that.
I kind of agree, kind of disagree. I don't know. I think that this team really for the past 3 years at this point, they've been, people look at them as like, they should have a top 3 defense. They should have one of the best offenses. And in reality, they never do. I think that there's something to be said where you're winning games on paper versus winning them on the field. And I really just don't think that this team has got the job done. So then to me, what you need to do is make those moves to elevate the team and not strip the best players away. That's the real problem that I have. Because if you still did have oh, Jadeveon Clowney, DJ Reader, DeAndre Hopkins, and then you were adding in maybe instead of, still picking Blackhawk in that second round, maybe you trade that second round pick for Brandin Cooks, maybe you ease up Hopkins' job, maybe you still pick a Grenard, and instead of using him as, kind of a main pass rusher on this team, maybe he's just kind of a situational spell guy to Jadeveon Clowney. Like, I think that there is a lot of value in adding pieces to those stars, but at this point, there's not many stars left. Obviously, there's Deshaun Watson, and on the defensive side, as we see here, like, who is there other than J.J. Watt, really?
Yeah, and at least on the other side, you've seen some solid players, and I guess they do have a couple. I think a player that really showed up last year, and I think is going to make that even next step, is Zach Cunningham. Again, liked him coming out of the draft, and, man, he just has a knack for being around the ball. He really does, but how much of that was from DJ Reader being in front of him, creating that space and creating him the lanes to run, because he's a very slim linebacker. That was kind of the one thing about him is you looked at him, man. He looked more like a basketball player and a football player sometimes. So having that big body like DJ Reader probably helped him a lot. And is Eddie Vanderdoes going to be the player to step in and create that space for him? Probably not. But I still think Zach Cunningham is a good player, a real, solid piece. And the whole linebacking core is, to be honest with you. But on the other two ends, you see some pretty big holes. And obviously that corner duo, they're all names. They're Bradley Roby's probably the only one that's more than solid. He's a good corner, but he's a number 2 at best. Is Garyon Conley really going to step into that cornerback 1 role and take on wide receiver 1s? No. Is he going to take on T.Y. Hilton? No. Is he going to take on some of the other players he's going to see this year? No. He'll have what? They played the Chiefs. So Tyreek Hill. They got T.Y. Hilton.
A.J. Brown.
A.J. Brown. He can't do it. It's not the player. Obviously, if the Raiders, who were cornerback needy, felt the need to let him go, there's a problem there. So I think that's just it's sad. They have a lot of holes here, and this defense really isn't stacking up against some of the other ones we've been doing team recaps for.
No, I agree, and I actually really like the way you put that, in which they have a lot of number 2s, and that even goes for the offensive side of the ball. I think Will Fuller, that's a kind of low end number 2. Brandin Cooks, that's a number 2. Their tight end, that's a number 2 tight end. Darren Fells. I think that on defense, Whitney Merciless, that's a good second pass rusher. I think that both those cornerbacks, those are good second corners. I don't think, though, they have those force multiplier guys that are going to make other players better outside of a J.J. Watt. I think one of those guys, and I hate to keep bringing him up, like you said, DJ Reader, that's a huge loss to me. And it's not even just that you're losing him, it's that there's a huge downgrade in place. I don't really know if even signing like a Damon Harrison, I think that would kind of soften the blow a little bit. But I think DJ Reader last year was playing on an elite level. He was kind of a borderline Pro Bowl All-Pro guy, and I don't know if – well, I can tell you that I do know that Eddie Vanderdoes and Angelo Blackson are not going to play at that level. There's huge questions about J.J. Watt's health too. There's talk about him getting a contract extension, and he said that he didn't even want it because he wants to prove it, and I agree with him. I think that he does kind of need to prove it, because the last couple of years, has he really been healthy? He's been effective when he is, but how often is he playing? That's a huge question mark. And as you said, like that safety duo, we just got done with the Titans, and we're talking up that safety duo. This is such a middle-of-the-pack safety duo. Like Justin Reed, I think there's some potential, but it's like I just don't know where we're going if we have holes at every level of the defense and just a bunch of kind of betas and not many alphas.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. They need playmakers. They need that number 1 option, and they've had them. I think that's what you've been saying is they've had those options. They've had those playmakers that would make this team elite, but they, for some reason, let them out the back end and for not much, for nickels and dimes. So as much as the players are important and they're the ones playing the games, you actually have to play the games. So I guess getting into that, we got the 2020 schedule, and hopefully we see these games getting played, and it's looking like it. But, Mike, what are some of the games that stick out to you that might be able to kind of set or see where this team actually is?
Well, that's a good question, Mike. I guess if we're just talking about, like, winnable games, really like the back half of that schedule. I mean, you look at the front half, obviously, Chiefs, Ravens, Steelers, that's a lot – and even Vikings, Packers, it's a lot of tough games. But in the second half of the schedule, Jacksonville – Cleveland might be winnable. Patriots, Lions, Bears, Bengals. I think they could really do some damage there. And there's really not a game that stands out outside those 2 divisional games against the Colts, because other than that, there's a chance that they could go like 6-2 over that stretch, you know? So for a team that, even though I think that we've kind of been down on them overall, there is still a chance that they're fighting for a playoff spot atop the AFC South, as painful as it is to say. And I do think that kind of that second half of the season where you're going against the Colts twice, maybe the Titans once in Week 17, that could be to decide the division, you know? So I think that there's really a lot of winnable games for sure in the second half. Where are you kind of standing?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm right with you. It's a good thing those 4 preseason games aren't regular season because, man, they wouldn't make it out of it, to be honest with you. But that first half of the season's rough. And even if that back half is winnable, what are they going to come out in those first 8 games? I don't – if they somehow start 2-6, 3-5, are they really going to be competing at that point? I don't know. So, obviously, week 1 and 2, that's going to be a test. I think it's going to speak a lot to how much Deshaun Watson can really elevate this team. I guess just a game I'm excited for. I think there's 2 of them, actually. One, Week 10 versus the Browns. I think that's a really good, kind of level for them. I think that's where they fall. I think they fall in that mid-range, mid-tier that might be able to elevate it just a little bit to maybe make a playoff push. So I think the Browns, it's my birthday, so I'm actually going to be watching that game. That's a good game. I think it's going to be fun to watch. And I think another one is Thanksgiving versus the Lions. I think that team falls right in line with that. And maybe it's just some of my own bias, but I think it's going to be a fun game to watch. I think it's going to be an offensive shootout. I think both teams have a lot of questions on defense. So it's going to be a shootout, and I think that's going to be a good match. And I don't think it leans the Texans' way or the Lions' way. I think it's going to be a dogfight.
No, I mean, kind of going off that, you think of the last time Houston and Detroit played on Thanksgiving, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago? The whole crazy, was his knee down, got an 80-yard touchdown that they couldn't review because Jim Schwartz threw a challenge flag. That was a crazy game, you know? And I do think that these teams are kind of pretty evenly matched. I think that that'll be a really interesting test as we kind of see, are these teams going to fall back, or are they going to gear up for that playoff push? Another really interesting game, Bring, that you brought up, primetime games, that Week 1 rematch, obviously, against the Chiefs. We saw in the playoffs, they were leading for a good portion of the game, and then they kind of got hit with that Kansas City spurt, So to be playing on opening day in Kansas City, that's going to be an interesting test, to say the least. I think Houston will be the definitive underdogs, and obviously I think we both agree with that. But if they could really pull a game there, that'll be really interesting, Imagine if you looking at this, you kind of think, okay, they might start off 0-4, but if you can upset the Chiefs, kind of hit them in the mouth off the Super Bowl win Week 1, you really don't know what could happen from there. Take that momentum into kind of those 2 pivotal AFC North games, and it could be really interesting. That's all I'm going to say. For a team that I don't want to say that we're writing off, but we are kind of putting down a couple tiers from where they were last year, even though I do think that that's definitely deserved.
Yeah, for sure. You know what else is interesting, Mike? Mic'd Up, our team recaps, our channel. And I hope you guys are watching. And if you guys are watching, subscribe, comment. If you have something, if we said something, if you think the Texans are going to be a Super Bowl contender this year, let us know. If you think they're absolute trash and you want to fire Bill O'Brien, we'd probably agree with you. Let us know. If you are a real big fan of one of these teams, if you think the Bengals, if you are a Bengals fan, if you want to know how that whole show is going to turn out, you comment. What team are we going to do next?
Man, we're doing the Joe Burrow show themselves, baby, the Cincinnati Bengals.
Damn right we will. So, guys, we're here for you guys. We also just enjoy football and spreading the wealth of knowledge from watching way too much film and watching way too much football.
And, I mean, especially now during the quarantine, it just gives us a forum to, even if nobody is watching us right now, we're still having fun doing it, So if you have fun watching us, like Mike said, comment, subscribe, tell a friend, Let somebody know. Show somebody. Spread the word, because we're enjoying ourselves. We hope the 3.5 people who are watching this are enjoying themselves. And with that being said, Mike?
I think we mic'd up, and now we mic it out.